Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Intentional Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Campion, and I'm psyched to be back. We've had a little bit of a podcast hiatus here, but we are back, and we have so much good stuff coming in the coming weeks and months, starting with this conversation today with Andy Rafal. So who is Andy Rafal? Well, he's the CEO of a company called OLI. They are a chemical engineering software company that's at the center of some of the most interesting trends that are happening in the world right now, including the intersection of AI and the physical world that a lot of people are trying to figure out. So we get into that in this conversation, talk about Andy's experience leading that company, the challenges he faces, things he's learned along the way. We also go back in time and talk about Andy's early career. So he had a really interesting first phase of his career where he was a very successful hedge fund investor working alongside of one of the most famous investors of all time. So tons of lessons learned as an investor that he's translating to his time now as an operator. And I think a ton for so many of us to learn from this conversation. Anyone starting their career, anyone making a career transition, we talk a lot about that. And also for those in leadership positions like Andy is himself. I think there's a lot to take away from this conversation. I really enjoyed this conversation. Andy's really a dear friend of mine who I've known for 20 plus years, somebody who I have a ton of admiration and respect for. So I'm really grateful that we got to do this conversation today. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Before we get into the conversation, remember you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter. It's also called Intentional Wisdom. In that, I share insights from leaders like Andy, as well as notes on my own experiments and things I'm messing around with in the areas like health and wellness, careers, and tools and technologies. Those are kind of the orbits that I'm kind of living in for the newsletter. So it's everything I'm trying, everything I'm fiddling around with, etc., once a week in your email. So check that out. The link is in the show notes to the newsletter. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Andy Rafal. So I thought we would rewind the clock and we'd go back to Ithaca, New York in the late 90s. You are at Cornell. So let's start there. Tell me about what that experience was like and kind of what you were trying to figure out, what you were studying, all that kind of stuff.
Let me try to put myself back there. I'm 18 and, I think a lot about this now. I have, a 15-year-old and the experience of showing up at college in the mid-90s, I think today there's a lot of talk about being pointed, like you're supposed to know where you're going in life. And I was like the furthest thing from it. The things that influenced me, I showed up at Cornell, I was a dual major right off the bat. I was like, I'm going to study computer science and econ. And, those things were things that I had like this vague idea. The first thing I realized, and as I looked around and I got out of a semester into this, was this didn't feel like my circle. Like this was not like and let me get into this because I think it's super important for like who I am and kind of some of the choices I've made. Throughout my life, I feel like I was naturally just curious and, the constantly just like wanted to ask questions like, why does somebody do this? Like, why are people going down this path? And I think the more you do that and you start getting exposed to things in life, and college included, you start to realize there are people that are naturally, like, they love order. They love that experience of seeing something come together. And I love that. Like, math was always my favorite subject growing up, and it was because there was like a definitive answer. Programming, and like there's obviously the very pre-AI days, but like was deeply satisfying when you felt something compile without bugs, and and so that experience of seeing it run and seeing like an output that you were actually trying to create was like wildly fun. But as you get further and you start to think about what that life path is like, for me that was where I found myself like scratching things off, like, no, that's actually not a good fit for me. And so, at Cornell, I had 4 majors. I bailed on studying abroad, which is like something I couldn't wait to do because I was, all of a sudden as a junior, I was pre-med, and I'll let you have a secret.
You were pre-med?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Then all of a sudden I was taking the LSAT, and I could get into why, and there were whys to these things. But that was kind of where I found myself. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you were bouncing around. I kind of like that idea of like almost like finding things that don't work, as opposed to necessarily having to land on like the perfect thing. So psych, econ, pre-med, all the way to, taking the LSAT. So that's quite, that's quite like a tour around the world. What was it about law that kind of drew you in, and then ultimately,
Yeah,
you pulled out of?
I take the LSAT, and I'm like, if this is what law is about, and let's just think about what the skill is there, right? Which, again, if there is an overlap with computer science and math, things that I love. It was solving problems, finding definitive answers when they were tough problems. And I was like, this is amazing. And then, as I started to ask these questions of people, and this is something I wasn't listening to myself enough yet. And this is something I think over time I did hone, was like, when you start to ask questions of people who are in a field, there's a way to ask those that helps you pick up on whether it would be a good fit for you. And the answer is not always the same for everybody. It's not like law is like inherently a bad career path. It would have been a bad career path for me. But I didn't listen enough to like the answers I was getting. So I went to law school, right? And I spent 3 years in New York City accumulating law school debt. It's a great way to go. And but in all seriousness, the things in that I loved. I mean, if you're deeply curious, if you loved reading, if you love history, which all those things I do, law school's amazing, right? But as you start to get closer to like a career path, and I did like 2 summer internships. Again, I came back to those questions like, what is your life like? And that was, somebody told me this earlier in my life, and it was like, ask people who are 10 to 15 years ahead of you, what are they doing? Like, what is their day like? What do they love? What do they hate? As I unpacked that, it actually became very, very obvious to me that this would have been a really tough path.
All right, so you finally figure out that law is not the right path for you. So we're in like 2003. You're coming out of law school. You actually have a job offer from a prestigious law firm in New York City. You turn it down and you decide to do what probably looks like from the outside a total 180 and step into the world of finance at Tiger. What happened there? How did that happen?
She'll kill me, but I'll follow the stairs. So I'm on a break from my now wife, and it's 2003. I've just taken the bar exam. I had interned at this law firm, Latham, and I was like supposed to start there. And the way it works is you're taking the bar exam over the summer, and you're supposed to start about a month out, and they give you a couple of start options. And during this time, I'm starting to talk. I'd actually interned at Tiger back in 2000 when I first got to NYU. I interned there for both the summer and my whole first year of law school. So we built some relationships, and that's like a separate story. Like Tiger in 2000 could not have been a more fascinating place in the world. But
and maybe for like listeners and viewers who don't know the background, so Tiger was one of the most famous early hedge funds run by Julian Robertson, kind of, I think one people would consider like a real pioneer of the hedge fund industry.
But it's even more interesting. And in the spring of 2000, Julian shut his fund down. So after this incredible run, and let's just like situate listeners, this is the peak of the tech bubble. Crazy things are happening in the market, right? You have AOL buying Time Warner. You had kind of just in a massive shift in kind of what was in favor in the market. And that was actually a really tough time for Julian. And
this is when I started my career on Wall Street too. At like the peak frenzy of, mom and pop throwing money into the market and CNBC on every screen and everything like that. So he basically calls it quits at that time. Yeah.
And so I joined as an intern, and this place, I don't know anything about this, right? Who am I? I'm a kid who went to Cornell. I don't know who Julian Robertson is, right? I know Tiger has a name, but at this point, when I'm joining, all I know is I'm going to the 40th floor of 101 Park Avenue. I just graduated college. there are only 7 investors left. Right? Now, I didn't have any perspective, but what it was obvious to anybody, even a 21-year-old kid, was this was an office designed to seed 250. There were multiple floors, and it's 40th and Park in New York City, and there were basically like 10 of us. And that experience, I mean, I look back at it now. I was sitting across the hall from a junior analyst who Chase Coleman, who grew up to be the head of Tiger Global, you know. And he was just I don't know how old Chase was then, but he was a young guy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so that was my experience. And I'll come back now to the law piece of it, which is to say that, you know, I was a part, but had a say that I might end up with this woman, and who happened to have a father who was a career attorney. And so I sat down with her during this time, and I said, look, you know, I don't know if I should even be asking you this, but let me just bring this to you. You know, this feels like a big life choice. I have this offer to join this hedge fund. It's a startup. And, you know, the story was it was out of Tiger, but it was these beginnings of Julian seeding new funds. And so this was somebody who was going to get $30 million from Julian to start a fund. And I would join him. And I was like, do you think I should do this? And she looked at me and was like, no, that's crazy. You just spent 3 years in law school. You just took, like, you're taking the bar exam. You're freaking out. Just go be a lawyer for a few years and see what you think of it. So I walked away and thought about that for another 10. I said, hey, we're broken up. I can go there. You know?
Yeah.
I ended up
maybe I might have been in your ear at that time.
Yeah.
Like, dude, don't listen to her. No. Sorry, Leslie.
Yeah.
So you make the pivot, you make the leap. It's a non-conventional move. Tiger, as the world had known it, is basically gone. There's a few people in an office and the idea of seeding a few funds. And so you show up. I understand maybe there was like a fateful elevator ride somewhere around this time frame.
Actually, even earlier. That was as an intern, but
okay.
I'll share this story because it does still bring a smile to my face. And Julian has passed on, but for those of, you know, for people who never got a chance to, you don't know Julian, he is a legend and a gentleman, and was like a figure that I don't think anybody who worked at Tiger has anything but just deep admiration and respect for, like, what he built. But me as a 21-year-old, you know, I show up at Tiger, and again, I told you, I don't know anything about this world. One day I'm riding the elevator down at the end of the day, and I get to the elevator, and there's an old man in the, let's call him older. He wasn't old yet, but he was definitely older. And he's waiting at the elevator. It's the 48th floor, as I mentioned earlier. And, you know, you get on, and as we're waiting, he looks at me and says, you know, do you work here? And I'm like, yes, I do. You know, I'm an intern. You know, I work here. I work at Tiger Management. And we get on the elevator, and again, for Brett, you knew me that I wasn't always the smoothest, and so trying to make small talk, and one of them Park had glass elevators, and this is relevant because the entire ride down, and it seems like it's taking like an hour, you're looking at each other, you know, right. There's nowhere else to look. This older man is kind of looking at me, and I'm like, how do I make small talk? So I go, do you work here? And so he sort of like smiles, actually laughs a little bit and nods, and he says, yes, I do. And so like it was the next, a couple of days later, then I'm sitting at my desk, my little cubicle, you know, again on the 40th floor, and my boss starts, I hear his voice coming, and so I sit up straight, and he's walking around with this older man. And I met him on the elevator. He works here, and he makes his way over to me. And my boss is like, I'm very proud to introduce me. He's like, so, because he knows it'll be a big deal for me. He's like, so I want you to meet Julian Robertson. And I was like hard, everything about it.
Yeah.
It's like, how low can you sit in your seat? And Legend of Wall Street.
Yeah, we've met. Okay.
And I know he works here, you know. So.
Yeah. That guy, he works here. Yeah. Nice. That's funny. One of the most legendary investors of all time. That's a solid question. Do you work here? All right, cool. So into the world of finance. So this is 2000. you start your career at Tiger, working in the hedge fund space. So what's that like for you actually starting to figure out life as an investor?
The thing about that time was there was just so much to learn. And there was things, and the great thing was it wasn't just learning how to be an investor, and there was like so much there, but it was also learning how to manage a business, right? Because we were our only, in the first days as a $30 million fund, we were getting all these services from Tiger because the rules weren't really well defined. This had been a $20 billion fund and it had all the infrastructure to support that. But now over the course of a couple of years, it became clear like these needed to be like services that each fund handled independently.
Okay. This is like marketing your fund and that kind of
It's
thing?
back office, like accounting. It's like investor relations. It's actually trading stocks, right? Like, I'll give you an example, like because in the early days, this was so short, and I remember like this was like probably the most formative investing memory for me was I had been in Tiger a couple months, right? And the person who had started Tiger Consumer, amazing guy, very non-traditional background, Pat McCormick, and he but he was having his like I think second child. He had like I can really relate to that period in life now, but not then. And he was like not in office as much then, and he called me up one day and he's like, "I want you to look at this company," right? And it's and the name of it, and like your listeners may be old enough to remember this, but it was a company called Footstar. Okay.
Footstar.
Yeah, Footstar. So they ran shoe stores called Foot Actions. Foot Action. Yeah. Okay. And that was like back in the day, they were like a third player to Foot Locker, and Finish Line and them were kind of about the same size, and like there was Champs. And anyway, the reason this guy had this phone call one day, I remember it like very vividly. It was Thursday afternoon, about 5 o'clock. The company announced they have a new CEO. Okay. And I didn't know anything about them at the time, and so I had to start like figuring it out. But what it turned out was they had been basically in an accounting scandal for about 12 months, hadn't filed financials. For those who are not exposed to it, like filing financials, it's pretty hard to analyze a company.
Kind of a red flag. Yep.
Yeah, it is. And so my boss is like, but their new CEO, he had been I think it was a Foot Locker CEO. So he was like a big deal for them to recruit, like in the middle of an accounting scandal. And in his mind, for him to have signed on to join the company, it meant good things were happening. They were about to resolve this accounting scandal. And so he's like, "I want you to look at it." Okay. Been there a couple months, Greg. Like I was like, I think
no problem. Got this covered, boss. You rest easy.
Yeah. So I stay in the office till at least midnight. Like, I'm on my Bloomberg. I'm on like, I start calling these analysts, and you have to understand, Foot Action is a small company. I think they had 3 analysts covering it, and none of them were really covering it. It was like guys who they listed it, but barely. So I call them up. They're like, "Can I talk about it?" And they had nothing for me.
Yep.
And so I spend so I'm like, okay, I want to be ready for him Friday morning. He doesn't show up to the office Friday morning. I get a call from our trader. He's like, "So you guys just bought 5% of Footstar?" Sorry, it's a 5% position for us. We didn't buy.
Oh, okay.
Although it wasn't that far off. It was a small company.
Okay.
And so we buy this, and I'm like, "We did?" I'm like, "I haven't even finished my research. How can he feel comfortable buying this?" And so we've got a 5% position in it, and I'm like, "Okay, fine. He must know this." And so stock goes up over the course of the day, up like 40%. I'm like, amazing.
Wow.
Now,
40%, it goes
40%.
up in one day?
Well, because of the CEO news.
Right.
And probably didn't hurt that we were also buying it aggressively. And so the stock's up a ton. So I'm feeling great.
Okay.
And that weekend, I'm like continuing to plug away. And I'm actually finding some things. This actually turned out to use some of my my legal skills, because like there's actually some really interesting things I didn't know it at the time, but this is a category of investing. Anyway.
So you're trying to solve the puzzle that is Footstar, and trying to figure out, is there real value here that people are missing, basically?
Exactly. Like this stock had drifted down from probably, these numbers won't be perfect, but let's just say $30 down to about $3 over the course of the prior 18 months. And so now it pops up to $5, and that's where we are with it. And over the course of that next week, and I get a little bit of progress, not a lot. I'm like, I live with two guys on the Lower East Side at this point in life. And all weekend, I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, okay, but like, look, it went up, and my boss, he knows this space. It must be good. The next week, stock goes every day is down 20%. And so it basically goes from $5 to $4 to $3, and by Friday it's down around $2. Right. And there's like bankruptcy rumors. There's it's going back, and so again, I'm starting to now, like, this is my new job. I left law for this, right?
Right.
And here's where I think it's both an interesting story, but I actually think there's some like lessons in it. So I ended up there's like a sunk cost here, and I think that this is like something that it was true in that decision to leave behind law school, right, with 3 years of it. I think it's actually true at every investment you make in life, whether it's like public market investment or life choice, where you have to approach facts fresh each day. Right, and that's one of the main things I learned as an investor, that you cannot be stuck in the way you thought about something like when you first made that investment choice. You have to take information as you get it. And so this is something I watched Pat do that week so well, which is like, I don't know what day we pulled the plug on it. It was probably Thursday or something like that. He realized he had just made a poor, he had effectively made a big bet on something where it was very imperfect information, which is the reality of the but that as things were coming out, it was clear that this guy had come in to be CEO, not because the company was about to turn around, but because he was actually going to take it to bankruptcy. And so pull the plug there. The kind of the final piece of this story that I always find kind of fun was that I found out 3 days later, when the company did file for bankruptcy, by the way, that my roommate was working on the bankruptcy filing the entire time, and he knew about it, and fortunately knew the law very well because he just passed the bar exam, but knew that he should.
I was going to say, so the Chinese wall held in your apartment.
Yeah, I'm not sure the walls held very well. Those were the days of like temporary walls in New York City, but
yeah,
held for that purpose.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. And so that was a humbling kind of lesson, I guess, for you right out of the gate. But I think there were some successes there as well, and ultimately being a very successful kind of period of your career. I think Green Mountain Coffee maybe was another one that had a different outcome. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think it's important just like think about the journey of like of any business and a fund, and I think you could see it really any business, and like learning how to be good at what you do. And I think I'll come back to something I said earlier, which is my favorite experiences in life were where you found something that was actually, there was a very simple concept within it, but that was sort of hidden, and you could pull the thread on it and start to think about what it might be if that became the central story. So like take Green Mountain Coffee, and like for people who, the simplest way to think about it is your Keurig machine, right? Green Mountain came on my radar, and what the fun thing about that stage of investing was we could invest in anything. It didn't matter how small a company was. And Green Mountain was a very small regional coffee company.
So that one ends up ultimately working out for you, I guess?
It does, but I'm going to go I'm just going to tell one other story if it's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think it's a kind of instructive, which is like, this became like one of my defining investments at Tiger. I think we had 3 straight years where it was up at least 70%, and it was a large position for us. So 3 straight amazing years. It becomes like a favorite of everybody in my fund. And it's a story that we're telling, we're sharing it all over the place. And I remember one night I get a phone call, and I'm in the gym, okay? And it's my brother, and he works at a much larger fund. And he had, coincidentally happened to invest in the same sector, but in much bigger companies. So we didn't overlap all that often, but Green Mountain had become one that he was aware of. He certainly knew how we felt about him, that we were investors, and we were probably top 10 investors in the company at this point. He gets a phone call that the next day, David Einhorn is going to present it as a short at the very public stock market conference.
Okay. I know which conference you're talking about. And as a former employee of Lehman Brothers, I know the Einhorn name well because that was another favorite short of his that he made a lot of noise about.
It's worth saying that David Einhorn, I think a Cornell guy, if I remember right,
Okay.
was also a wonderful investor. Like I have deep respect for people that can take really well-formed shorter debate. It's really
It's a
hard.
hard thing to do. Shorting stocks is a really hard thing to
And
do.
then to speak publicly about them, that takes a lot because you're now saying to the world, I think this company is wrong. I think the way people are thinking about it is wrong. And
Yeah.
so I'm
It's
sitting,
also not an awesome way to make friends because there's a lot of people that own that company, that work for that company, etc. Again, I'll reference Lehman
yes.
Brothers. Yes. Go
So,
ahead.
so my brother gets a heads up that this is happening the next day. And I put people on the, like, this was like the worst part of investing. And it's why actually, part of the reason why I couldn't wait to do something different, but was that there were moments in that where you just felt like you knew that the next day was just going to be just like you hitting your head into the wall for 8 hours. Like 9:30 to 4:30 was going to be you losing money and it was going to be terrible. And so I didn't know what he was going to say, but I knew that it was going to be a complete torch job on Blue Mountain. And sure enough, it was. And I believe, if I remember right, it was a 100 slide deck. And I think the stock finished when the presentation was over was down 40%. And it was still, I think, our largest position. And so, one of those days that I will not forget. But the truth is, and I'll come back to that Footstar lesson, which is, and I think it's true today in what I do as well, is like, you have to take facts as they are.
Yeah.
The world is what it is, right? And we didn't fast forward to what I do today as a software CEO and think about it in the context of AI in the world. But the world is what it is. And when you get new information, you have to evaluate it. And that was a fascinating one. We actually came to the conclusion that we thought he was wrong. But we knew we were like, he was going to be dead money for a while. I mean, who was David Arnold was David Arnold.
So Tiger ends up closing in 2015, I believe. So let's talk about what that period's like for you, where you go next, and I'm kind of interested in also like what this transition looks like for you, but also like what does it look like from an identity perspective?
It's a really interesting phase of life to like put myself back in a decade later. In retrospect, the thing I loved most was building a business, right? Like the investing part, the ones where you got to unpack a thread, it just loved, right? But I started to realize that, and we had built ourselves as a fund, and we were no longer just consumer, and that for a while was enough. Like we pushed into media, into industrials, into technology, and then hiring people that were like amazing. And I had a mentality of like I wanted super curious people. When you're hiring in the hedge fund space, you have this lever that is very unique. That is like you can offer a lot of money, right? Like what motivates most people in the investor world is fundamentally it's money. And you can create like a culture that may help you attract people more than another fund, but like it is very transactional. And that was starting to wear on me. And what we were building felt like it had hit maturity. And it felt like the way the industry was evolving just wasn't how I wanted to orient my life anymore. And when I thought about like what was like interesting to me, the problems, like I knew I wanted to unpack different problems, and I had so we ultimately, my partner and I thought he should keep the fund running. We ultimately felt like I was walking away. It was the right time for him to stop too, and so we shut it down. And I know for myself, I was like, I needed a pause, right? There was this moment where I was like, it became public that we were shutting down, and I was, still at a point in my career where, I don't know, maybe, there was certainly a pathway to opening in my own place and doing something completely new. And I said, nothing. Like, I will make no decisions for. And I think this was like really, not everybody has that luxury. And I realize it's a luxury to say 3 months, I'm not going to make any choices. But I think it was probably the single best stretch of my life in terms of allowing me to make thoughtful future choices. I think that was the most likely thing is I would have probably gotten sucked into running another fund, you know. But what did I do? I was living in New York City. I had two young kids, you know, and I found myself like, I got back into programming. So yeah, I took CS 100 at Stanford, great class. I would go for coffee with anybody who wanted to have coffee and talk about like what they did, what did they love, what they dislike. I went to like movies in the afternoon. It was the first time in my life I went to a movie by myself. It was a very unique phase. And I'll just say that that was a really scary time, right? For somebody who had been driven for my whole life, you know, to pause and not have a next step was like deeply destabilizing.
When I went through a similar period, when I switched, kind of moved to Charlotte and changed careers, like there was this year where it was very uncomfortable to answer the question, like, what do you do? You know? And so that's why I kind of wonder about that identity piece during that period too.
Yeah, there's a line, you know, I've always loved reading. There's a line that's sat in my head for many years. Don't remember the author, but it said, boats that stay in the harbor are safe, but that's not what boats were built for.
Yeah. All right. I feel that one.
Yeah. I think about it a lot, and I thought about it a lot during that time. Like, there's easy pathways in life. You get one life, you know, and I say this to every single person that interviews with me back at Tiger and at Orla. Like, you get one life. If you join, you are making a bet on us. And like the same thing for me, I'm making a bet on what I'm doing in life. And so you don't want to waste that, right? It's so much time. You gotta make the most of this.
So let's talk about OLI, joining there in 2017. Give us a little bit of a background, because I know this is a company that your dad started, but give us a little bit of a background on the company, what you were stepping into. Did you become the CEO right away? Just curious about that. Some of that kind of stuff.
So this was like, there's things that I think people who are trying to figure out their career path probably can take from this. There are many very unique elements to this, but let me share a little bit of context. So OLI was started 54 years ago now, but back when I was first thinking about it was a decade ago. So it had been started by my father, who was a early PhD chemical engineer and didn't have computer science degrees back then, but that's basically what he was. And he started the company so long ago that when he started it, he was actually driving a taxi in New York City during the day and programming on punch cards, which is what you put into to store the code. At night, because you rented mainframe time, and that was what he could afford. So the company started in the 70s. It is always, my full life growing up, it was a company that kind of was like teetering on going out of business. When people asked me what my father did, I had no idea. I'm just gonna be really honest. Like, I knew science, I knew chemical engineering. What was it? Didn't know. And then, but I did know enough. I mean, my father and I are very close, and there's 7 kids in my family. I knew enough to know that it turned a corner as a business at some point in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, and found itself as like a stable company. And my father had stepped away from the day-to-day in like 2005, and so it was a decade later, and I don't know, I watch Succession, love Succession. You don't want to let a Succession story play out with 7 kids like that, even. And the truth was it was the right thing for the family to figure out, like, how do you get rid of this thing, right? This company that he had built. And so back in 2015, I actually helped the company try to sell it, right? And it's a like incredibly complex niche company that serves really complex chemistry, solves the world's most complex chemistry problems. That's the way we kind of think about it. Its clients are like large industrial companies to people who are planning clean energy startups and things. And so there was like a market for it. And we were like this close to selling the company. And honestly, my exposure then ended there. And during due diligence on it, there was a contract in 1983 And you can imagine software has evolved a little bit since 1983. And it took some time to resolve the way that the intellectual property was described in this 1983 contract. It slowed down this process. And long story short now was that when we reopened it, I'd actually started to really think about this business, this company that existed on the periphery of my life, the whole. And I realized there were like a few things in it that I thought, well, why are they compelling as an investment? Like the things that I loved as an investor, when we talked about peeling it, kind of unpacking a thread, I was finding an OLI. And I found myself like up at night thinking about those things. And I was like, wait a second, I think there's something here. And we reopened the banking process, kind of got a value on the company through another LOI on it. And I ended up acquiring the company at that. That it happened back in 2017 now. So kind of 8.5 years in.
You acquired the company?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, it was like a kind of a inflection moment for this company that was at the time 45 years old. A team of scientists. I mean, 20 people, I think at the time, 14 of them had PhDs in chemical engineering. The company meetings felt like a university group of professors. Yeah.
Was that interesting for you? Because I think you had talked about, I'd heard you describe walking into Tiger early stage as that being like the most interesting room you could be in. Yeah. Was this similar situation or different?
It was very different.
Yeah.
At Tiger, and sometimes those, again, I have to put myself, it's such a great juxtaposition, Greg. I can picture on one side, the 101 Park, 48th floor had this table where you could have like 20 people around it. It would be like some of the most famous investors in the world today were sitting at the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there were guys like Lee Lu, who was like a legend and became a deep close friend of Charlie Munger. And anyway, it doesn't matter. That was one table.
Yes.
Now my new table was this windowless room in New Jersey where people were talking about chemistry that there was no way I was going to understand this.
Right.
For a bit in there, I was like, did I make a mistake? Are these problems that I can help with?
So you step in as owner and CEO of the company. The original plan was to kind of sell it and move on. That plan changes at some point as you start to see something different. Maybe tell me a little bit about that.
So yeah, let's think about this. So it was October 2017, when this closes, and COVID happens 2.5 years later. So over that first couple of years, I'm starting to build something that I can kind of recognize. Putting in place structures that I thought would apply here. I'm reading constantly. Because if we step back and why did I do this? It was I believe I had spent my entire prior 13, 15 years interacting with some of the best CEOs, CFOs, management teams in the world, thinking about why companies succeeded and failed within the same industry. What were the strategic choices? That was what I was obsessed with. So when I came to OLI, that was what I was obsessed with doing. I was fundamentally, what I loved about OLI was I thought there was something incredibly differentiated in what it did. Right? That was the core of every great investment I had ever made. And in OLI, I saw the most differentiated company I'd ever come across. But that didn't mean that I knew how to help it. And so that was the thing that I struggled with for those first couple of years was who am I? I'm just an outsider. I'm my father's kid here, right? These people know him, not me. I'm just a guy. I'm the CEO. He's taking me serious. I can't, But the truth was that the key there was figuring out the problems that mattered. What had held the company back. It wasn't growing. Right, it was it was a very small company, right? With 20 employees, it was awesome. Its relationships were deeply embedded at those companies, but being able to grow is the lifeblood of kind of our whole economic story in America, right? Figuring out how to do that was the problem that I had to unpack, and And COVID comes along when I'm just feeling like I'm figuring this out, right? And I'm starting to build teams, and it's like I have scientists, I have like these people who have dedicated their careers to working in science. And then I have software developers, because this is fundamentally a software company. And then I need to build out like a great commercial team. I can speak to clients, and like everybody's motivators are different, but it's not the same as a hedge fund analyst. It's just not. And that was in itself like a wildly compelling thing to like struggle with. And then COVID happened, right? And truthfully, if COVID never happens, I think my original thesis probably would have played out, which was like, I couldn't screw it up that badly. This company had been around for 45 years. And I thought like, look, I'll build it up. I'll put in place a few structures that will make it a more valuable company. And then I try and move on, and I'll figure out what to do next. And then it happens, and that shocked everything, right? The way you did business could not stay the same, right? And the way you related to people could not stay the same. In there, I found the ability to take my father's company and turn it into my company. And that was like an incredibly kind of connected period. I think a moment when we as a company found our voice more. LinkedIn became kind of a really valuable platform for us to connect with people, telling our stories. And so in that was probably the roots of finding something that I felt like could really be actually my life's work. And then through that time, I think is where I really transitioned to being a CEO, and to really trying to unlock things that would allow us to be long-term deeply relevant to where our customers were going. So like, I'll give you real examples here. The company's roots, and like this is why I like bought the company, was they were based in water chemistry. And that's at the core of what OLI does, is we help understand how water interacts with everything. And water's everywhere, and it causes a lot of problems. And so that's why OLI is like relevant 54 years in.
So think about OLI today, right? You're operating this 54-year-old company that was started by your dad in between cab fares in New York City in the early 70s. And so that's some like really cool history. But at the same time, like you've talked about, you're very critical in all these like super niche areas. Then you've got overlaid on top of that, AI is now disrupting every industry, and you are suddenly finding yourself operating this company that is critical in so many ways. And you can talk about, the world has become obsessed with things like rare earths and how do you mine those and refine those and all that kind of stuff. And obviously chemistry and what you guys do is like a big part of that. But tell me a little bit about just that, the kind of where technology has evolved to today, specifically with AI, and how that is shaping, I guess, the company and also like the opportunity that you're seeing.
Yeah. Simple question, Greg. Like I think this is where one of the things that I love about life, and let's come full circle. Like if you like unpacking things, if you like asking questions, the questions you answer 20 years ago continue to layer upon themselves 10 years in, 20 years in. Like you can leverage that to have better answers. And so today, like I wrote about this recently, but I think a lot about like what I was exposed to in my first time as an investor, of kind of the disruption of e-commerce and the way that legacy companies dealt with that. I mean, one of the things that I find really compelling is that I think 3 of the 5 largest e-commerce companies in the world are traditional retailers, right? If you go back in time, I was not with people. And, you can find a lot of short cases on Walmart.
Yeah. Well, you wrote a really interesting piece, like highlighting how different companies navigated this. Some leaned into it, but I actually thought it was super interesting. Some of the examples you gave that totally like said we're not playing in e-commerce, like TJ Maxx and Marshalls, and like ironically they've survived just fine. So like it's almost like I guess it goes back to strategy and like figuring out what is the right
Yes.
one for
So
you.
great. So perfect way to think about it, which is this is what defines companies that endure and companies that don't, which is you think about where your point of differentiation is, and then you think about how that gets impacted by technology change. We don't get to define like everything in the world, right? Technology is changing. I run a software company in an age of AI. That is like, it's table stakes. We have to be able to deal with that technology. The question is, and this is the strategic question, right? I always push my team to think, what are like the 3 to 4 strategic questions that we are grappling with? Is how does what makes OLI differentiated get impacted by AI? What are like the things within it that are threats? What are the things within it that are like opportunities? How does it change what we can do, how we can build? And so we've been thinking about this for years now. Fundamentally, OLI is like pretty much a data science company. Like what we are is we're data rich and data poor environments is the way I kind of describe it. And how does that get levered in an AI world? And so I think it's unbelievably fascinating to live in interesting times, and you're not going to get more interesting than like how the world's operated. My thesis is, this has been going on since 2008, is that the speed at which changes happen, not just like AI, but like broad macro changes, I think fundamentally rooted in what 2008 did to the world. And
Interesting. Yeah.
but anyway, that would take us down to a separate thread.
I actually want to ask you one more question about just AI and tech. This kind of intersection of AI and the physical world is becoming a space that everybody is suddenly focusing on. Whether you're talking about robotics or everything else. I know you've written a little bit about that as well. Like, it's not as simple as layering AI on top of data, because it's too early to take the human out of the equation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there's that. And there's also, so I try to reverse things a lot. And I think about our clients. So we work with 300 companies around the world that are dealing with, and when they use us, they're dealing with their most complex chemistry problems. And some of them are like startups dealing with like completely new processes, new pilot plants. Some of them are like the world's largest industrial players with the world's largest industrial assets. And I think for myself, if you are dealing with an incredibly complex chemistry problem, typically in conditions that are not things that we have seen before, right? Or else you would just have like an existing playbook for it. Are you able to trust the recommendation? Like, what gives you trust? And so I think the core of all of this has to be trust. Like, if you have a low stakes decision, you don't need a lot of trust. The more important it is, the heavier the weight. Like Jeff Bezos talks a lot about this in like decision making, the difference between decisions that are easy to reverse and ones that are very complex to reverse. I think it's the same idea here. And so as you go up that curve, your trust, your confidence needs to be higher. And so the fascinating thing to me is that AI is coming on the scene, and in it, AI always says things confidently, right? And the recommendations, you don't see all of the decision-making process that goes into it. And the can you trust what's being given to you? And so I think the key thing is that it has to be informed by guardrails for it to be like trusted in these high stakes moments. I think the really interesting thing about the human in the equation, and this is just a thing that I think society is having to grapple with, is as we have this aging of the workforce, we are seeing, especially in some of these sectors that have relied on like experts who are retiring, a lack of that generational knowledge being passed on. I know, in many companies, the role that was played by a 30-year lifer is now being taken over by somebody who has 5 years of experience. And it's really hard to find those people in between. And so anyway, that's making it, I think, even more complex.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we will have more leaders like you stepping into real world businesses, especially in the manufacturing world. Before we finish up, I wanted to ask you, there was one more recent period that that you had that maybe had you spending a little bit more time thinking about things, and maybe your recent decision to start writing publicly came out of this? I don't know, but you recently had a knee surgery and were sidelined for a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So deeply personal, and I'm happy to share. My whole life, I have found that my brain races, right? And you get older and you start to realize that can be diagnosed as ADHD, and you can self-medicate. And my self-medication was running, right? Whole life.
I think that works for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the moment where I feel my brain slow down, where I think a lot of my like clarity comes from. When I feel like I'm super stressed, when I get a call telling me David Einhorn's publishing a short, go for a run. It was like a midnight run in Central Park after that. I think, so it was actually Memorial Day last year. So I've run 10 marathons. I switched to kind of doing Ironmans, and I say that like very, very modest goals for that. But yeah, I had done and was training for a couple of them last summer. And I went for a run one day, and my knee just gave down, and at the time I was like, I'll get through this. So I'll limp back, and I went to the doctor. I was like, I'll just do some rehab, PT. And it was the first time in my life that I actually was forced to stop, to pause, to it required like 3 knee surgeries to correct. It took months to figure out exactly. I had surgery last September, and 6 months in, I ran my first mile about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. I'm not going to lie. I have an essay and a picture of that treadmill saying 1.00, and it brought tears to my eyes, seeing that. But I actually think that pause, and there were 6 weeks where I was non-weight bearing. And for those listeners who have done that, I have a lot of respect for you.
Yeah, I've got a friend going through something similar right now.
Yeah, not fun. And it is for somebody who has relied on one therapeutic crutch for 20 years, it's really destabilizing. And I know that for me, it forced me to really pause and think about how do I want to find meaning in this phase, this time, what is an outlet for this? And running actually has become something that I'm really obsessed with. I read Stephen King's amazing book on writing, and just how do you storytell? It's not something I've ever spent any time with before. I love talking to people, but honestly, I've always felt very uncomfortable talking publicly. And so it was a huge leap of faith to try to hit post on something. Yeah. And so, I think this pause has been just a reminder that there are other ways, there are other things that can provide that meaning. And, I'm always struck, there's an image I have that in my mind, and I think about it a lot, with the choice to leave finance behind, the choice of what I do today, when I think about what motivates people, and I've talked about that a little bit in this, but it's this image of 2 people crossing a marathon finish line. And you've got one person who is deeply disappointed because they haven't hit their goal. Mm-hmm. And you've got this other person who is celebrating that moment, right? And the thing about that is if you define yourself on a goal like that, a finishing line, the number of miles you run, how much money you have, it can be a tragedy or a triumph, where that same point for 2 people. But if you define it through the process, that piece of getting better, of learning, of trying to make a difference in other people's lives, I think it's easier to find that meaning even in failure.
Yeah, I love that. Well said. Well, I am happy that you have decided to hit post and to start sharing. I think you've got a lot to share, as evidenced by this conversation. And so happy that you did that. I'm excited to follow you along as you write more on your Substack and on LinkedIn. And I have a feeling that this could be the start of a beautiful new podcast career for you as well.
First thing, Greg. Yeah.
Hey, I think you're natural, and I think sometimes when I interview people on podcasts and it's their first one or early on, and you can tell like, oh wow, I caught this person early. I didn't catch you early in your career. Obviously, you're very accomplished in your career, but caught you early in terms of this type of thing. So I'll look forward to watching you on much bigger, more exciting podcast than this one, but or maybe this one will grow along with you.
I'm not letting you end on that note. I'm going to say for your listeners, I am in deep admiration of what you do here and with intentional wisdom. I think it embodies exactly. It actually helped me think about what was happening in my life and how to actually things that were happening somewhat organically, but then adding purpose to them, because I think you're living a purposeful life and pushing to like learn, and it's an amazing thing, and it's a gift to those of us who get to listen and read what you're working on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the idea. Kind of learn in public and have some humility about it, and kind of talk to smart people like you who have figured some things out. All right, I'm going to ask you one last question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask you, but just to get one more nugget of wisdom out of you. If you had to give me one thing that you've figured out in life that most others haven't, what would that be?
I think it's that I actually have an essay coming up on this, and it's something that I feel like I'm learning now, and only in the last year. It's that I spent my whole life learning, right, and like kind of thinking about like how you could come at something with like with knowledge to inform strategic choices. You've heard me talk about that. Like that's so natural to like how I think about decision making. But the thing that I've learned, and I read this book over break, and blank on it, but it's about the author finding Emma Straub finding her father in his words and like in his books, and her father was a famous writer, contemporary of Stephen King. But I found that same thing with OLI, in that for a long time I didn't even want this to be known there as my father's company, but it is. And what I realized is that actually he's a very different leader than me, and he the personal connections that he built with people were deeply, like he leaned into the personal work. I lean into more of like the work and like the objective and the choices. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I'm realizing is just combining those two things, like the ability to connect with people. And I think that's part of like this pause in life of this last months. That's sort of what we have as we age. It's like our career successes are one thing, but it's like the relationships that we build and like the way that we impact other people around us. That's kind of what's going to live on.
I like it. That resonates with me too. I think sometimes in my day-to-day, I can get too focused on what are we trying to accomplish here, all that kind of stuff. And I'm probably guilty of not leaning in enough on the personal relationship side of thing. And I think back to earlier in my career, the time that you and I were spending in New York City in those days. And I'm like, what's lasting from that? It's not any career success or money that was made. It's, okay, I have a handful of relationships and people that I still talk to and love, and that's what's lasting. And so that should hopefully inform the next phase as well.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, and maybe next podcast we could talk about when we almost started Zillow, and and like 4 years before, and when we our adventures in Friendster, but that could be a whole nother time.
Hey, I'm glad you mentioned a next podcast, because I would love to have you back on this show. So let's do that. I guess just to finish up, we've mentioned your writing a little bit. I think I was one of your first subscribers. As soon as I saw you set up a Substack, I was like, oh my God, I have to get on this. If Andy is putting his name on something, it's going to be super high quality and thoughtful, and it is delivered on that. in spades so far. So I will link to that in the show notes. Everybody can go follow Andy on Substack, follow him on LinkedIn. And otherwise, thank you, Andy. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Well, there you have it, folks. Andy Rafal. I think hopefully you can see now why I have so much respect and admiration for Andy. He is seriously one of the smartest guys I know. I am personally very psyched that he started to share his insights more publicly. So definitely go and follow him on LinkedIn and Substack. You will not be disappointed. I think he's going to be sharing a lot of thoughtful content there. I'll link to both of those in the show notes as well. Also, if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, so all the things I'm learning about, trying, experimenting, etc., in the areas of careers, health and wellness, tools and technologies, make sure you subscribe to the Intentional Wisdom newsletter. That is once a week. It's the best of what I'm learning, what I'm experimenting with, etc. Would love to have you along for that ride. I love interacting with everybody who reads that newsletter. I got a lot of replies every week, starts so many good conversations, and gives me ideas for who I should have on this podcast next, including some of the readers of that newsletter, like Andy. So definitely check that out. The link in the show notes. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening or watching. I will see you next time.